good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who have joined this week's cafe. Jane wanted me to pass on her apologies to everyone, so you have me to look at rather than Jane. She is currently on a plane to Dubai, probably about 2 hours out from Dubai. So welcome. Today we welcome Celine Clarke, Head of Advocacy and Public Affairs at Age Action, and Eileen Sweeney, who joined Age Action and the University of Third Age in her local area some 15 years ago. We set the scene today to really delve into taking programs to practice and helping to create that environment that enables older people of all ages to do what they have reason to value. Age Action is Ireland's leading advocacy organisation for equity and human rights for all older people and people as they age. Your bios certainly tell us stories, and the full bios will be in the chat room, of a life of learning that's resulted in various formal qualifications, but perhaps more importantly, an enthusiasm to share real life experiences and encourage people of all ages to be part of combating ageism. Celine, your background as a broadcaster and a journalist is a perfect combination in advocacy and media training for older people while actively promoting their participation in public policy decision-making. One of the connections between our experts today is that ageism brought Eileen to Age Action and the University of Third Age. Eileen, your brief bio does not do you justice in any way, shape or form to tell a story of lifelong learning across several sectors and discipline, which must have been underpinned with a number of challenges, I would imagine. Perhaps the formal qualifications is an enthusiasm to share real life experiences and encourage people of all ages to be part of combating ageism. I would encourage people as we're going through the discussion today to post your questions into the chat function, and I will pose those questions from time to time as we go through the course of the discussion. I firstly want to call on Celine. Celine, as a broadcaster and journalist, what is the narrative about ageism that carries weight when building the business case to invest in programs against ageism?
Thank you, Greg, and everyone for coming here today to have this dialogue with us. We really appreciate this space. So for me, I've studied journalism and I work in public relations and specifically public affairs, seeking to inform and influence public policy. And what we see in working maybe with the private sector to promote an age-positive work environment is the idea that we are all working for longer and potentially will work for longer because we're living longer, healthier lives. And so some of us will want to choose to work for longer, and others of us will have to work for longer to be able to afford to retire, because many of us, of course, are carrying mortgage debt into older age or renting because less of us are being able to buy our own homes. So the nature of the workforce is changing, and we can see that the private sector, both nationally here and globally, even these discussions happen at the World Economic Forum and at UN levels, we can see that the workforce is changing, and therefore we need to make sure that age is part of our diversity inclusion strategies in the private sector. And so the business case for any business is, of course, it makes money. And so if you can demonstrate that having an older workforce and having space for a diverse workforce benefits the bottom line, well, that's what's good. And there are studies both in the US and globally that support that argument that it is a more business efficient to make sure that you have a diverse workforce, and age being part and recognizing age as part of that diversity is critically important. In Ireland, just under half of people aged 60 to 69 are at work, and nearly 1 in 4 people aged 60 plus is at work. So, and we will see a continuous rise in the number of older people in work for the reasons I said earlier. But ultimately, the business case is it makes money, and the scientific evidence supports that about a positive aging workspace. But I think it's important, though, to reflect what older workers bring to an organization as well. And the literature and the academic evidence and the practice shows that knowledge and experience are two of the main predictors of good performance in a job. And older people have knowledge and experience in abundance in the workforce. And that's critically important, whether they have the formal qualifications or not. So that applied knowledge is critically important.
Thank you very much for that, Celine. Talking about the private sector, it's sort of what came to mind for me. I remember several years ago doing some work with a public relations company in New York, and the interesting thing that I found, that perhaps that's one private sector group that needs to catch up to the rest of the world. The oldest person in that particular company was 35. So there was a lot of years of older people that could have been supporting and that particular company, but it's the public relations groups that seem to really focus on a younger cohort of people rather than accepting older people. And you probably have seen that throughout your profession or in moving to your current role.
Yep, I definitely see it in my own practice, that there's a sort of an awareness or an awakening or an attuning to the fact that we are an aging population globally. That there's 1 million people over the age of 60 in Ireland currently, and obviously that's a good thing, and we will continue to grow that older population. And I think the media industry and the advertising industry, marketing industries have a huge responsibility to acknowledge the role that they have in perpetuating ageist stereotypes, which of course then inform and influence our own approach to our own work. But they also have an opportunity, and an amazing opportunity, to challenge those stereotypes and contribute positively to acknowledging and building an age equal society for all of us. And getting rid of these like homogenous terms of the elderly and positioning older people as vulnerable all the time. These wrinkly hands photos that we see attached to lots of articles, the idea that older people, and particularly women, have grey hair in a bun and a Zimmer frame in front of them. So like these are small things, and they might seem trivial, but they reinforce the stereotypes that we begin to internalize at a very early age. And Age Action conducted a public poll last year by a company called Ireland Thinks, so a representative public poll to understand the ageist attitudes in Ireland. And what we saw was 1 in 4 people reported experiencing discrimination on the grounds of age. But what was really interesting to us was that people over the age of 70 were 3 times more likely to agree with ageist narratives and opinions than younger people. So that self-directed ageism was at a very high level amongst our older people here.
Yeah, and that was the findings in the State of Aging in Ireland 2022 report, is that right?
Yes, so Age Action published an analysis of the data that's available on older people, as well as documenting the lived experience of older people in Ireland in a report called Reframing Aging, the State of Aging in Ireland in 2022. And what that basically sets out is the story of an older person in Ireland. And we disaggregated by age for decades, because obviously there's a tendency that once people are over 65, it's an homogenous group, and that's how we talk about them. And in some ways, that's where all the data, the way the data is reported as well. So we wanted to challenge that and have a greater insight into what it's like to be in your 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 100s as well. And we made several recommendations, and one of them identifies ageism and the prevalence of ageism in our society as one of the biggest barriers to all of us being able to age well. The other one, of course, is that inequalities that build up over the life course need to be addressed. And that's why we focus a lot of our policy work on areas of social justice and addressing inequalities through the life course, to make sure that when we do reach older age, and if we leave the workforce in particular, there's very little voice and representation for older people once they've left the workforce. We are campaigning in Ireland for a Commissioner for Ageing and Older Persons to be appointed. There's one in Northern Ireland, there's one in Wales as well. So we have neighbours who have this representation, but we don't here. So there's a lot to learn from the Reframing Ageing in terms of what needs to be done, but also the lived experience of older people now. And that's also informed by our membership of the University of the Third Age in Ireland, which is a network of older people who are self-organising, and Eileen will talk about that more. But for us in Age Action, there's a real value in having that contact with those older people and the ability for them to inform and influence the type of policy work we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, that's really critical, and it brings me to Eileen, because you're one of the older people from the University of the Third Age, and you can share your experience beyond the noting of learning. Can the University of Third Age respond to the growing issue of being disconnected and isolated, for argument's sake? And what are your real life experiences?
Good, Greg, thank you very much. And thanks to the IFA for this marvellous invitation. Yes, as you know, this is called the U3A, which is the University of the Third Age. And often people ask, what is the third age? And that's the period of our lives where we're allowed to pursue new interests and activities. And it also promotes the concept of lifelong learning and continuous personal development, which is a value that I place highly. And I try to keep that going throughout my life. Now, as you say at the beginning, it was age discrimination and ageism that brought me actually to be aware of U3A. I was doing some research on the internet to find out about age discrimination and compulsory retirement, and I came across Age UK and their campaign for the elimination of the default retirement age. And I asked myself, is there an organisation similar for older people in Ireland? And I came across Age Action. And when I was looking at the website, I came across U3A, and that rang a bell with me because a number of years previously, I had actually been visiting my friend in the UK, and we went out. We went out together just for a cup of coffee or visiting a place, and we met one of her other friends, and she had just come back from a U3A meeting. And we both asked her, what is all of that about? And we both said, when we're no longer working full time, that would be interesting to see if, a place to go. It just sounded, we didn't know anything about his values and what it was doing, but we thought that would be something we'd both like to do. And she joined it when she stopped full-time work in the UK. And then when I saw it in Age Action, I then rang them up. And I said, is there one close to me? And yes, I found one within 10 kilometers. And what I did was it was in the local library, and I just rocked up, to say the least. It was on an afternoon. And I just walked in, gave my name, who I am, and then sat at the back. And I did that for a number of months until another of my steering group members on the team on this call today kept trying to get me involved. Now, it didn't suit me to be active. I was just going along to see, right, it was filling a calendar and it was satisfying a personal need, but I was doing a whole pile of other things. And then eventually I thought this was marvelous. And it was a great opportunity and what the activities were, there was a talk and a speaker, and it was coming from the group, and there were visiting speakers and lectures on various topics. You didn't have to have any qualifications. It didn't matter who you were, and it was not being credited. It was very much similar to what the continuous personal development programs would be for professional organizations. You'd come along and you keep yourself up to date. And I have my own continuous personal development. I do my own CPD. And so I still use CPD, and I say, right, where am I on my CPD? Now, I was totally overloaded with CPD hours during COVID, but all of that also brought in the activities around areas that I knew nothing about, because there was, during the winter months, say from September to May, there will be a monthly meeting. And then in the summer, we were organizing just trips around the place, cultural visits, visits to museums, visits down to Shannon, to the Foynes, where the first aeroplane and the Clipper came and landed. And of course, being from the aviation sector, I was interested in that. And a whole pile of other activities and organizing. But the big thing then, I then was, it wasn't a hierarchical organization. And I said, this is marvelous. This suits me and our style and the life course for continuous lifelong learning. So there's a steering group, and the steering group is organized as regards members who are prepared to sort of take the teams and the organizing and decide what we need to do. It is really not, that's how we actually get our work done. And we have actually up on our website an infographic of how we get our work done, because to actually explain how we organize ourselves in a non-hierarchical way is very difficult for people who've come from a hierarchical system to understand. So we put together a little infographic of how our lifelong learning happens. And in the center of it is everybody in the group. Everybody contributes, everybody learns, and then it's supported by teams. We always have a buddy system, that no one person is left on their own to organize something. There's always a buddy with them. And then we only meet twice a year, and we just decide what it is we're doing for the next month. Okay. So it's sort of, that's actually what we do and how we do it. And it's, but it's, as Celine said, it's a program within Age Action, but we're completely independent, self-directed. And as you can see, we're a learning circle, but we do have to explain what university means in our context, because most people think in terms of a university as a structure and a building with a whole pile of accreditations. So we also widen our horizons and say, well, we're in an urban community. There's a lot of other educational in the traditional sense, adult education. We're not duplicating, and that's very important. So we don't, unlike other U3As, maybe in other countries where they run courses, we don't run courses in our group, but we do link a lot to local communities, and in particular to the Trinity College in Dublin and to DCU, which is the age-friendly university. And a lot of our groups, we say, right, they run courses like we would have a taster of, say, creative writing and life writing. And then DCU then ran a program in which you just got that over a semester. Again, not credited. And some of our groups have actually written books and contributed to books and written their life history. And others have gone to do photography. So it depends on what your interests are. There's a vehicle there for it, but that's what we do. And that's and what people say is that they really enjoy the occasion, and it's a social occasion. It's very relaxed. And also there's an opportunity to volunteer. Nobody is forced. So you just volunteer, so you feel as if you're contributing. So it's nearly a win-win for everybody. I certainly, over the 15 years, I've got involved in it. Now, I remember.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
I remember last week, the person who was making the IFA last week said all of the research, it should involve older people. Well, the universities and the medical people and all of those health services actually come out and they describe for us what their research is, and they look for volunteers to be part of the research. And that is fantastic learning for us and continuous personal development. I've signed up to as much as I possibly can. So including at the very beginning, the Trinity College dental students. So they were looking for volunteers. So I became a volunteer. Then for the opticians, we do that as well. So there's phenomenal opportunities.
Eileen, I'm going to interrupt you there, and I'm going to come back to you. But it sounds like you're busier now than ever. I'm curious as to what sort of time commitment do you personally put in to the University of Third Age each week? And I was interested to hear you talk about the Dublin City University. Of course, they're a very strong member of the IFA. So it's great that they're supporting the work that you do when you have people going there. But what is your time commitment to the University of Third Age, do you think, on a weekly basis or a monthly basis?
Well, it goes in peaks and valleys, Greg. For instance, at the very beginning, we only meet once a month.
Right.
And it was a case of advertising the once a month meeting in the local library where we are and in the parishes. And if I wasn't involved as an organizer, as part of the team, then it would just happen. So I would just come along, enjoy the session and come home.
All right.
Then over time, you get involved that we needed to get some communication out to people via email. So you're talking about when there was no email. So I had a skill set that I could do that.
Right.
But I didn't have sufficient skill set to do it, because you're talking 2008, etc., and 2009 and 10. So DCU were organizing intergenerational learning programs, and they were organizing programs of technology and how to sign up to Google and a Gmail. So I went along and sat in the class when they had their own computers. And I said, I want to try and do that for U3A Sutton Baldoyle.
That's fantastic. That is really, I mean, your grandchildren must be very proud of their grandmother being so digitally literate. So that's wonderful. I want to actually go to one of the questions that have come from a contributor that sits on all of our global cafes, Shmuel from Israel. He's asked the question, what do you or can you say about the impacts of social aspects as poverty, low socioeconomic status, social inequity on the healthy aging discourse? What can be learnt about lifelong healthy aging discourse among low socioeconomic populations? And that was from Shmuel. Now, Celine, I'm going to actually ask you to comment on that, particularly in light of you were on the radio this morning talking specifically about the impact on some policies or programs that the government's implementing in Ireland.
Sure. So going back to talking about age equality, so we understand the social determinants of health and the interplay of your socioeconomic status with your ability to age well and also age healthily. And for example, recently in our poll on Are We Ageist, we found that people on lower incomes are more likely to agree that they can't improve their health. So they recognize that there are barriers to being able to improve their health in older age, or they don't have the resources to do so. And we also find that people who are in employment or in lower paid employment or outside of employment tend to experience more discrimination on the grounds of age. So these people in lower socioeconomic status. And just to say as well, in Ireland, where age is recognised as one of the 9 protected grounds under our equality legislation, socioeconomic status is not. And we are currently working with a number of organisations to try and get that rectified. We also know that in Ireland, older people, so only about 12% of people over the age of 65 in Ireland reached third level education, compared to about 35% of people currently in the 25 to 34 age gap. So you can see when policies are brought in around access to free third level education, it really benefited a generation, but there is a generation of people who didn't get that opportunity, and therefore they didn't necessarily get the opportunity to accumulate sufficient resources to be comfortable in retirement and to have good health outcomes also, obviously, in that situation too. So I think it's a well-placed question around the indicator of socioeconomic status as a predicator for how well and long you might live in healthy age. And we have found definitely in Ireland there are distinct inequalities experienced among the 1 million people over the age of 60. And for those that are on the lower socioeconomic status and low paid work, or were outside of the workforce for a long time as well, that they will have less favourable outcomes in their experience, definitely.
Thanks, Celine. Can you briefly let the audience know what the discussion was on the radio this morning?
Oh, sure.
And what the government is planning to implement?
So at the moment, like I think in most countries, Ireland is experiencing a cost of living crisis, and the government has introduced a number of one-off or emergency measures to support people to cope with that, as well as some sustainable measures targeting people who depend on social protection. So the latest reports this morning were that the government was considering giving a €200 universal credit to everybody. So every household would benefit from €200 to help them to pay for their energy bills in April. And our argument is that that money is poorly targeted and should be targeted at people who depend on social protection for the majority of their income. And in Ireland, most people over the age of 65 who receive the pension depend on the state pension for the majority of their income, because we have really low private pension cover. Largely because of that experience of not having access to third level education and being in lower paid jobs as well. So that whole effect catches up with you then in older age. We also know that according to the United Nations, that 48% of people over the age of 65 are in inadequate housing. So while most people over the age of 65 in Ireland own their own homes, nearly 48% of those are inadequate housing standards. And one of the key indicators for the inadequacy is that they are poorly insulated homes. So basically what that means is we have a lot of people living in homes that are really drafty, that are really difficult to heat. And when we combine that situation with not having sufficient income because the state pension doesn't keep up with the rising cost of living because it's not benchmarked. Every year in Ireland, the government decides what the pension increase should be, and it becomes a bit of a political debate as opposed to an evidence-based policy response. So we have people living in drafty homes that don't have enough money to heat them. While there is a supplementary welfare protection called the fuel allowance, which is a direct payment to people who are on low incomes to help them cover the cost of fuel, we believe it's inadequate. So this €200 credit going to everybody's home, regardless of the type of home or the type of income that you have. And even if you have a second home, maybe a holiday home, you'll also get the universal credit. While there are people really struggling to meet their basic needs, is just a poor policy in our opinion, and it doesn't contribute to an equality or human rights perspective.
Celine, I couldn't agree with you more. I think if it was a targeted approach and means tested, perhaps those that need it would be getting €400 and some people would be getting none. So it would be a much fairer and equitable situation if it wasn't just universal. People are posting questions to the chat function now, and I want to thank you for that, but keep bringing them along. One of the questions from Mary Ship was, are there any groups, university of third age, in the United States that you're aware of?
My understanding is yes, and the model is such. Sometimes they're tied into universities, but the U3A group, if people just do a search engine, Google it, or whatever browser you're using, or a search engine, you'll get a whole list of U3As all over the world. And that's how I got to know what others are doing. And I think South Africa, some of our members have family in South Africa, and they have visited their family in South Africa and stayed for a while. They join up with the U3As there. And I think there's one around the West Coast in the States, and definitely in Australia, because when I started my email, I said I'd love to do a website, which I didn't know how to do it. And but I made contact with the U3A in Blue Mountains in Australia, and they hosted our newsletters until the person who was their web designer said, well, look, I'm going to have to, he's leaving the position, but you can do your own free one with Google. Yeah. And all you have to do is, and that was done in a November weekend, but with the help of the DCU, I just kept clicking and touching and intuitively, and it worked. And nobody, I don't ask me how it's doing it. I'm afraid to touch it. But
I can understand that. It's interesting, some of the questions that are coming in, and particularly one from Asher, and I'm assuming, Asher, you're from India. Celine, can we join online for as a volunteer? And I don't know if India has a university of third age. I suppose I would need to do some research, or others can do that. But can people from outside of your local area also participate in some of your volunteer groups?
So in the U3A, as I said, they're self-organizing. So Age Action provides a secretariat, and kind of giving some support to set up, and insurance. Insurance is really important for the activities that it's been taking place. So we take public liability insurance, but they're self-organizing and independent of us. But definitely some of them are working very much online at the moment, and they may very well welcome someone's input from India as well. And we have other volunteer opportunities, but I think maybe looking at how you might start one in your own area would be good, and contribute to the whole global movement of U3A. And definitely many of our members in Ireland would be very supportive of walking through the process, including Eileen, who's one of our active champions. Baldoyle Sutton is a really strong U3A group, and we have many of them at different sizes. And I think that's what's really important to us, is that the U3A is a very diverse group of people who have come together in the interest of just continuous lifelong learning for learning's sake, and no formal qualifications are sought or offered. And so it's very accessible, going back to the point about the socioeconomic status. That doesn't matter. We have people who have achieved third level qualification and achieved very senior roles in their private sector or civil servant jobs. We like former diplomats participating, but we also have people who didn't work in the formal sector at all, whether they were homemakers or otherwise. We have people who've worked in the agricultural sector and farming. It's a very diverse group, and that's what's really important, to make sure that it's kept that way.
All right, thank you, Celine. It's I know, Bruna, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You put a link to the University of Third Age, so that link would provide some details as to where U3As are across the globe. I'm going to call on two people to pose questions. And firstly, can I ask Dominique Boyd to come forward, and following Dominique, I'll have Francis Wilkinson. Dominic.
Thanks, Greg. Are you in Australia, Greg?
No, I am in Toronto.
Toronto, okay. I'm originally from Australia, so I was just kind of curious.
Oh,
I'm down in Nova Scotia.
20 years here.
Yeah, I've been over here for over 50. So as someone that studied andragogy, I've been a lifelong learner myself. My mum was a lifelong learner and kind of brought me up that way, I guess. But there's people that naturally gravitate toward lifelong learning. And then there's others that sort of stay away from it for a variety of reasons. So I'm wondering what you found does sort of turn the trick to interest people in lifelong learning. We know that it has to, in some way, connect with needs they feel, and maybe with the pleasure that they get from learning something. But what have you guys learned about how to attract people into these courses and these events that you're offering?
Do you want me to answer that, Eileen, here? Thanks very much, Dominic, for the question. Yes, the whole issue of lifelong learning and University of the Third Age, for me personally, the logo or the upfront expression of lifelong learning, maybe I'm just only recently been aware of it, but it's out there now a lot more. It's part of, as you say, the decade of healthy aging. And to get people in, we're organized within our community and we advertise locally in the parish newsletters and in the library. And then there's word of mouth, but it's a case of just pop along. But what we often find is we have a topic, say for instance, it's a topic on life administration stuff, such as social protection or health information, or a speaker. You will get a lot of people along and then they're in the door and it keeps on going. But, you know, as Celine said, yesterday there was a talk over on one of the U3A groups on the west of Dublin, which socioeconomically they're supposed to be categorized as disadvantaged, but the U3A group operates there within their further education. And the talk was actually on physical activity and healthy aging. But it's in the local community, and the local community, you're a profile of what's in your local community. So whatever the demographic is, and whatever the socioeconomic, it's for the community, because we're in the library and that is very much community based and it's for everybody and it's included for everybody.
Thanks, Eileen. Dominic, I mean, clearly it's about how do you engage with people or spark the interest, and whether it's interesting topics, interesting speakers, and then actually having the word of mouth and getting publicity out about those things, which would certainly create and spark interest. Francis, can you come forward with your question?
Mm-hmm. Yes, mine was for Eileen as well. I'm just curious as to whether your group, which you say met in the library, what you did during COVID, whether you went online or whether you were able to continue meeting in person. And if you were online, have you had any problems going back to being in person? Because the group I'm associated with has sort of changed its character over the period of COVID.
Yeah, Francis, thanks very much. Yes, we're in the library, and in March 2020, we had our meeting on the Wednesday. We knew COVID and there was something coming down the track, because in February, we had a person who's in the School of Nursing, an associate professor, in talking about world pandemics. And we knew from the behavior of people who were going for scans or diagnostics in hospitals that there was something going on. So all of a sudden on the Friday after our March meeting, the library is closed. But the interesting thing is we nationally, there was a whole philosophy of keeping connected. And so then Zoom came out. We'd seen Zoom with the World Health Organization. I'd seen, well, what's this Zoom all about? And then how can we get it? Now, we were involved with a digital tablet called Acorn. And I had that tablet. It was a project designed by older people for older people. And it's called My Acorn. And we're part of the Older Persons Council, and it was trial, and a number of our group had trialed. So a number of us had a tablet, a number of us had PCs, but we didn't know how to get Zoom. So the word of mouth was out, well, you can download it free. And of course, once you had the technology in your home, then you were ringing around, how do you do it? And of course, it wouldn't work, and it would do all sorts of things. Now, but then what happened, we got on to Age Action, and we said, look, can you do a central area for Zoom? And some of our talks, we said, can you host it? Can you send out to the U3A network? Our group, we didn't do it ourselves because we really didn't have the skill set, and we couldn't rely on our PCs and our technology in the area. But other groups, for instance, I see the U3A Sutton Vale or Bray, 100% Zoom, and it was marvelous. Then I see another person who did a Rap Minds, and they had Zoom, but then coming back, so we didn't do that, but we linked in with all of the other U3A groups, but it opened up a whole world. We heard about IFA, so we made connections. So, but on the technology side, we were able to support through the Older Persons Council because they were doing that. But on re-entry after COVID, yes, Francis, you're right. There's definitely, people have changed their routine. The library only started opening up for us last May. So we were very lucky that it was May, because we don't have in-person meetings in the library after May. So all of the program we'd organized for summer of 2020 was just shifted. And we actually met in a local pub, the steering group, and then we organized the summer activities, and it was brilliant. People just in pairs went out and about, and it was a great summer with weather-wise. And that's so. But then we re-entered the library last September, and yeah, it was slow. But then we're now at the stage, unfortunately, it's overcrowded, and we've actually had to turn people away. But yes, you're right. People have changed. I know Rap Minds tried to have a hybrid. Now, a hybrid is not working.
Yeah, Eileen, there's no doubt that the whole situation has changed since COVID-19. And I think there's some people that like the idea of Zoom because they can sit in their pajamas at home and have their meeting. But there's people that like the in-person meetings so they can socialize in a different way other than Zoom. Celine, I want to come back to you, and I want to talk about, Age in Action is working to implement the WHO global report on ageism. What does this actually look like, and how do older people in Ireland measure its success, or how would you measure its success?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question. So Age Action works to inform and influence. So the first step here for us in addressing ageism is informing the narrative and informing people of what ageism is and how it impacts on either them as an individual or us as a society. So the UN Global Report on Ageism, the World Health Organization Global Report on Ageism was an excellent resource to begin that conversation. And the Decade of Healthy Aging provides, that international mechanism for us to be able to bring to the attention of our public representatives the need to address ageism. So we've published so far 3 documents to inform the narrative, one being the poll that I mentioned earlier around mapping ageist narratives in Ireland, because that will give us a baseline, year 1 baseline, and then we will take some interventions over the next year and then repeat the poll as well, and we would hope to see some shift in the poll. We've also published a position paper to basically map the recommendations of the WHO Global Report onto Ireland's domestic policy. And so one of the things that we know is that the lack of representation of older people, particularly once they leave the workforce, is critically important. So us being able to seek and have established that Commissioner for Ageing and Older Persons Office that I mentioned earlier is critically important, and would be one measure of the recognition of the need for greater representation and participation of older people. The other one then is basically addressing age-based discrimination. I mentioned earlier that age is one of the protected grounds, but for us, access to justice for people who are over the age of 65 and being able to exercise their rights is difficult, not least because the process by which you would seek to have redress on the grounds of discrimination on age receives no free legal aid. So people who would like to take a case either have to pay for it themselves or represent themselves. Now, some people have managed to do that, and I know Eileen can talk a little bit more about that if you want, but some people have managed to go through the court system, the redress process for that, and others find that that's a barrier. So for us, expanding the free legal aid to include cases under the WRC, which is where you would take an age-based discrimination, is important. The other thing then, as I mentioned, is mandatory retirement clauses in the workplace. So age discrimination is permitted on certain grounds, and so many people have mandatory retirement clauses in their contract of employment, and we are working to have those abolished. So if we got that done, that would be another indicator that we were being successful. And there's a whole range of them, and particularly going back to the digital exclusion point, 65% of people over the age of 65 in Ireland experience digital exclusion. The majority of people over the age of 70 are not on the internet, and yet we have a strategic policy to offer digital services digitally, to offer public services digitally. So people will find themselves left behind or having a less favorable outcome. And so we're working really hard to make sure that people are digitally included, both in terms of the policy framework, but we also deliver free digital literacy classes to people as well. And it's learner-led, so it meets people at their own needs. And going back to the point earlier that Eileen was making about acquiring some skills during COVID-19, and we, in Age Action, we produced a series of how-to guides, literally step-by-step, how to connect your phone to the internet. And we made those available free of charge. We would post them out to people if they rang us. There was also a suite of them on our website, and anyone can take them if they want. And we have some YouTube videos as well, but we also got some sessions broadcast on the national broadcaster as well, on the public service broadcaster, to help people get that basic skill if they wanted it, to be able to connect on WhatsApp or Zoom. So we have some very practical interventions, as well as working at some policy level and seeking legislative change that we can map and hopefully measure as well, to see if we are successful.
You talked about the high number of people that don't have digital literacy, and it sort of brings me to the question, how do we reach those people? How does the University of Third Age reach people that don't have digital literacy? And one of the questions that came from Asha was, how does the program reach rural and remote communities? And Ireland certainly has rural and remote communities and high rates of non-digital literacy. So how do you actually get to those areas, and how to spark their interest?
And it's a really good question, and we do have a balance. I wouldn't say it's balanced, but we do have representation of U3A groups in rural communities as well, which is excellent. But we do know that some of those groups basically suspended during COVID-19, so they weren't able to get online and manage their group online for a couple of reasons. Lack of skills is one, but also poorer broadband internet access in rural areas as well. So we have offices around the country outside of Dublin as well, and we have a network of volunteers all over the country who support people to get online if that's what they want to do. We train over 3,000 people a year on digital literacy skills. And for us, the connection between other groups in the community, so not just older people, but through schools and through other community development groups, migrant groups, minority groups, and travellers, is really, really important to us to maintain and help us to reach those harder to reach people. We benefit a lot from having regional media. So we have quite a rich regional media, so local newspapers, local radio in Ireland as well, which obviously has to be protected as well. They don't fund themselves, and they're very useful to us to be able to raise awareness of our activities and that there's opportunities available as well.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
For training of digital literacy and rural, yes, as Celine said, throughout the country. So the U3A group is representing the demographic and the profile of the population in the area. And we adjust, you do your own thing under the umbrella of U3A, under the concept of lifelong learning. But as Celine said, the government policy is digital for everything as much as you can. But it's digital first, and we want not digital only. And on the Healthy Aging and Decade of Healthy Aging, we have a program on health to empower individuals to self-manage their health. But they need the skills to do that. And as part of the U3A group, we have information sessions, which it gives information about how to deal with maybe the health service, your clinicians, and it empowers people to start asking more questions and helps you towards self-management. So there's a need there, but to bring the people to the table, I've often said, you can bring the horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink unless you make the environment thirsty enough for them. But the digital only, or making everything digital, is totally frustrating. And people don't want it, and going online for everything, personal and health. And during COVID, a lot of telephone consultations for medical follow-ups. That was grand if you had a very, very good relationship with your clinician. But for first initial diagnosis, most older people were saying, well, as soon as they went back to work or back to our groups, they said, look, that was it. I don't want to ever do that again.
All right. Thank you very much, Eileen, and thank you for those questions. I noticed we have a hand raised, and Tom Mottle, I'd be very pleased to hear your question or comments that you have.
It's both a question and a comment, and it's with respect to a growing interest and involvement that I've had in hybrid meetings, where you combine both the in-person aspect, which is much more productive and comfortable and so forth, socialization for the individual. And it also, if you think about it from the standpoint of rural areas where they may not be universal connectivity, there may be isolated connectivity, which a hybrid meeting then can combine not only the bringing together of people at a place, but address the digital literacy, and that you always have a few people who are able to cope with this. That also would apply in communities where not everybody, even if it's a dense community, has the ability or the equipment. So hybrid meetings, which are much trickier to execute than regular Zoom meetings, I think is an area. And I'm just curious if there's any experience or thoughts by the speakers today.
I have participated in hybrid U3A meetings, and I find them great. But whoever is the host, the very first thing we did during COVID was say, can we join other groups? And other groups were marvelous, and they were 100% Zoom. Then the hybrid started, and it was a function of one of our U3A groups over in the west of Dublin. They're part of an education centre that has all the equipment.
Yeah.
And they had the skill set there. Now, the first talk came from a gerontologist, and it was brilliant. There were 12 people in the room because that's all for social distancing you were allowed. And then the rest of us joined over Zoom. So we were emailing and exchanging, what do you need to do? Because we were saying, can we do that in our venue with the library? So we'd have a few people in the room and then a speaker coming through the screen. And we were more or less told, no, there's too much of a technology on that. Now, yesterday, the same group had a different combination of hybrid, whereby the speaker was in the room. In actual fact, the speaker was one of the IFA 50, Dr. McCaffrey, on physical exercise. And then the question and answers in the room, he repeated, and we joined online. And so it worked there. But
Yeah,
you, as you say,
Eileen, there is no doubt there is room for both in-person and a hybrid option. And Tom, I thank you for the question. I know we're getting close to time, and I wanted to pose two final questions, or a takeaway, one final question to you, Celine. In 2028, how will you know that lifelong learning has been embedded in the decade of healthy aging? And then what would be your final takeaway message for the audience at the meeting today? But before that, I want to introduce next week's speaker. And next week, we're going to have Dr. Thomas Leon, and the topic will be improving older people's mental health, people living with dementia and their caregivers. So it's going to be an inspiring talk, very interesting topic. I encourage you all to participate, and you're all welcome. And I hope we get as many people there as we have this week. And I've really found the discussions today quite inspirational. Celine, where will we be in 2028 in Ireland? And what is your takeaway messages for today for the audience?
So I think Age Action would measure whether we have been successful in embedding lifelong learning in the context of the decade of healthy aging in national policy, if there is an actual policy basically to support lifelong learning in older persons, because currently across the national skills strategy, the indicators are up to 64. In another relevant strategy, in the adult literacy for all, it very much focuses on older people who are in the workforce as opposed to informal lifelong learning. So for us, it will be embedding lifelong learning in policies that support people to have access to it, whether that's financially, and even going back to the last question, people need resources and access to resources and equitable access to resources to be able to participate fully, and that's critically important. So we would see that in terms of a takeaway message. For us, we are just very much focusing on reframing how we think, feel, and act towards aging and older persons. And the key message would be to invite everybody to participate in that project, whether that's in your own home, community, country, or workplace. And of course, I know everyone here, by the reason that you are here, is you're already participating in that project.
Celine, thank you very much. Eileen, thank you very much. The discussion today has been really thought-provoking in many ways. And I think of the disparities that you have in Ireland with such the divide in digital literacy, but also the economic situation for many older people and the disparity around what's fair across the board as opposed to targeted approaches for funding support. The University of Third Age has a lot to offer across the globe. I know we have a University of Third Age here in Ontario, but I don't know if there's anything else in Canada. It's a group that every older person should be engaged with in some way, shape or form. And I would encourage all of you here to look at what the University of Third Age in your own area might be doing and look at actively engaging. I look forward to seeing you all next week. I thank you, and please, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and we will see you next week.